Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. Blended families are a blessing, but they're also one of the most difficult things you can ever do. Welcome to Faith Influencer. This is Jim Cunningham. This is your podcast for blended families. We're giving you resources on everything related to blended families. So today, we're going to talk about a different issue. What about adult children in blended families? So let me paint this picture for you. So you've heard all of the difficulties of blending families together with young children. So you've waited and you found a guy whose children are grown. And so you say, this is the perfect scenario. I really love him and care for him, and his children are no longer in the household. They are grown and out of the house. So we're not going to have any problems with children. So you go for it, only to discover that adult children in blended families can be as much of a problem as bringing together young children in a blended family. I hope that's not a surprise to you. Or if you're in that situation, you're probably saying amen right now. So let's discuss this and talk about adult children in a blended family. Here's what it all centers around. It centers around enabling adult children. I want to give you a definition of enabling so that you can follow the same track that I'm on here in my thinking. Enabling is when parents support their adult children in ways that can prevent them from becoming independent and responsible. It's enabling adult children. How common is this? It's very common. Now, I want to clarify one thing. I'm not talking about parents blessing their adult children. I am, for one, am very thankful that my parents blessed. When I first got married, there were times when it was a struggle financially, and my parents would come and visit, and whenever they left, they would always drop $100 bill or something on the table. I'm grateful for parents who bless their children. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about enabling adult children. And when you enable adult children, that is going to be one of the most difficult things on your blended family, your new marriage, more than perhaps you can even think, and let's dig into it. Enabling adult children has this effect. One, it affects their life skills. Two, it results into adult children staying at home too long. That's a big deal. You hear jokes about that all the time, that the kids won't leave. That perhaps enabling, or it creates this inability in them to handle real world life because you've enabled them. So what happens when you get remarried and the kids are out of the house? First of all, don't be surprised that your adult children have a reaction. Now, that's a surprise to many. Why would they have a reaction? Why do they care? I'm remarried, they're out of the house, and I would expect younger children to react, but why are my adult children reacting to this? Well, do you realize that your adult children have to emotionally adjust just like your younger children? They do. Even if they're out of the household and you've remarried, they have to emotionally adjust. Why? Because one, there's changes in the home that they remember, the home, how they remembered it. There are changes as to who shows up for Christmas. Now they have other siblings because their parent remarried and now they are there at Christmas. There are changes with the pictures on the wall. Now dad is in a picture with someone else. That's changed. So adult children have to adjust. They're going to emotionally have to go through their own adjustments. So realize that's a normal thing, but that's one of the first things that happen. Now, unlike younger children, when adult children begin to adjust, they're not going to find the same identity in the new marriage and in the new family dynamic, the blended family, as younger children will. As a matter of fact, if you remarry and you have adult children, they may never even look at themselves as a stepchild. They may never even consider that because their identity is not wrapped around the family like younger children are. They're going to figure out their own place in this family. So often they see themselves differently than younger children do. So here's my question to you, and let's talk about it. My question to you is, why can't parents stop enabling their adult children to the point that it creates a terrible stress on remarriage and a blended family? Why can't parents stop enabling their adult children? Well, let me give you some real life reasons that I'm personally acquainted with. One is sometimes parents are afraid of turning loose. They're just afraid of turning loose. I can tell you, I, for one, who raised two daughters before years later we had our son, raised two daughters. Their initials both start with M, so they were my M&Ms. And I was very close with them. There was a time, several years, that I was raising them by myself, and I was not ready for them to leave the household. We always talk about, and you hear the jokes about the empty nest. I was not one for the empty nest. How do you feel about that? Were you like, yes, the kids are gone? Or was it a struggle for you? I can remember my mother saying to me that when I drove off to college, and by the way, I never came back. I mean, I came back to visit, never came back to live. When I drove off, I left and began my own journey. And I listened to her tell me how difficult that was for her when I left. And it was hard for her to let go. She didn't have any choice because I was gone. Well, sometimes parents don't want to turn loose. And so they enable their children to keep that connection and to keep that closeness. So you can relate to that. That's one reason. Here's another reason. This one is not very flattering, but let's just be honest about it. Sometimes parents continue to enable their children because they built their whole life around their children. That is a very common mistake that happens in parenting. I'm going to tell you in a minute how that's affecting the blended family. Parents wrap their lives around their children. When I say that, I mean they're centering their whole life around their children. Everything is about their children, not about the marriage, not about anything except the children. Problem? Yeah, big problem. Because when you center your world around your children, then your children growing up begin to think that the whole world centers around them. That's not the kind of attitude you want your child to have. The world doesn't center around your child. And as a matter of fact, if you want a healthy household, your world can't center around your child either. So why do parents hang on? Why do they enable? Because they've centered their life around their children and they can't turn loose of that. They don't want them out of the household. Their child is everything to them, everything. All right, truth bomb. I'm going to drop a truth bomb. Here you go. Don't be offended, but if this applies to you, be honest about it. Here's the truth bomb. The reason why I'm still on that same point that parents build their lives around their children, their world around their children, and they can't turn loose. Let me tell you why I see what I see underneath. Why they don't turn loose is because when you turn loose of your adult children, you have to look at yourself. I'm pausing for effect. When you turn loose of your adult children, then all of a sudden, you have no identity. You know why? because you made them your identity. That is such a mistake that happens in parenting, but I'm going to relate it to blended families, so hang on. That is such a mistake that happens in parenting, that you make your children your identity. You lose yours. So how do you turn loose of your identity? Because that's what you feel like is happening when your child leaves the household. Do you know how many children leave the household and they get married, and the person they married struggles because their child is still anchored to mom and dad? Don't you remember that passage in the book of Genesis that you leave mother and father and cleave? The King James says that you unite and hang on to your new spouse. That parent that won't turn loose interrupts that whole thing, interrupts all of that. So there's the truth bomb, is if you've built your life around your children, then you're going to get a real fresh look of who you are without them. And many parents do not want to see who they are without their children. So now you've remarried. Okay, we're going to relate it to blended families. Now you've remarried and you have this new spouse. And this new spouse is hopeful because they didn't want to step into a household with younger children, and you have grown children. But little did they know that the problems with adult children in blended families can be equally devastating to younger children. And so they step into a household, and let's just say the dad is the enabler. Maybe he's like me. Maybe he had 2 daughters, and he didn't look for the empty nest. They're gone, and he still wants to enable them. So when I say enable, he still wants to, daughter can call up and he sends money. It's okay to bless them, but I'm talking about enabling. Or they always get their way. Or they can step in and plans can change because dad's going to go the way that the child wants to go. So you're that spouse into that scenario. You're the new spouse who stepped into that arena. I want to ask you, how do you think that new spouse feels discovering that you're enabling your adult children? Well, one, it's going to almost give them a license to run, because this is not what they've expected. But let me tell you how they're going to feel about it. They're going to feel like, you're weak because you're still giving in to your adult children. You're still doing everything they need. You're paying for their insurances. You're providing, you're buying clothes for their children. You're doing everything. Nothing wrong with being a blessing at times, but enabling them. So I've got a relative. I'm going to give you an example. I've got a relative who epitomizes this. He had a daughter who he enabled. It was his only daughter. He had 3 boys and a daughter, and his little girl was everything to him. So she grew up the favorite. She grew up getting everything that she wanted, and then she went off to school. Then she got married, but that relationship never changed. It was still dad's little girl. Okay that he loves his little girl, but no, the relationship was still that way. So he remarried. I'm telling some of your story right now. I know he remarried, and his new wife quickly found out that he was closer to his adult daughter and willing to provide everything she needed, more so than his own new spouse. So how do you think his new spouse responded? Well, I will say somehow, some miracle of God over all these years, she stayed there, but it was a very difficult thing. And she continually, when she was outside of the household around other family members, continually complained about how he did everything his daughter needed. So guess what? She started losing respect for him. Not only did she see him as weak because he couldn't be a man and stand up in his family and not do everything his daughter wanted, but she started losing respect because he was weak. But 2, and let me just say this, it's not normal. It's not normal to enable your adult children as if they were still in the household. What's normal is that when your children leave the household, they create their own. Whether they're single or whether they're married, they create their own household, and that household becomes their responsibility. And listen, dad, listen, mom, and your relationship changes. It changes. They're adults now. They're not your little boy or your little girl. They're adults now. You have to stop enabling them. They're never gonna grow strong as long as you enable them. There are some who are so crippled by a mom or dad who enables them that they'll never be able to function on their own without that tie to mom or to dad. That's not normal. Let me give you one other thing. I promise you that if you've enabled your adult child, if you've enabled them, that child knows how to manipulate that. They know how to manipulate dad. That child that's been enabled, let's say by dad, let's say it's a daughter, because that's often the case. That daughter, she knows exactly what to say to dad to get her way. Even though she's out of the household, even though she's grown, even though dad's remarried, even though dad has his own relationship, she knows how to call and say whatever she says to her dad to get whatever she wants. And do you think she'll manipulate that? Heck yeah, she'll manipulate that. She'll manipulate that all day long to get what she wants. And guess what? This dad can't say no. This dad can't say no. I'm going to flip it around just for equal time here. I could throw you into my car and drive you 1 mile away and show you a mother who has an older son who's in his 50s, and she will sneak money out of the family budget to enable him because he's not responsible, because she's always enabled him. And what's funny is that other family members know that she does that, but her own husband doesn't know that she does that she takes the money out of the family budget. She tells others, but don't tell him, is what she says, because he doesn't know. And so what happens with this son? He never grows up. He never becomes an adult. He never holds a steady job because mom enables him. So you want to cripple your child? Enable them. You want to make them so that they can't function? Enable them. You want to put them in a position where they'll never have the respect of another spouse or adult? Enable them. And then you create in them this little boy or this little girl who never matures to the point that they ought to. And for the most part, mom or dad, who's the enabler, you're to blame. You're to blame. You put them in that position. So we have a problem in blended families with adult children who have been enabled. What do? 4-letter word. Stop. Stop. You're going to have to break that bond. Maybe you have to have that conversation with that child and say, I can't do that anymore. I had to do that. I wasn't so much an enabler, but I can remember that I probably paid for things a little too long where I had to go to my daughter and say, honey, you're on your own, baby. You have your own household. You go do what you want to do. I'm not going to pay for this stuff anymore. Go. I'm encouraging you. Go. You're an adult. You can do it. You can handle it. Go pay your own car insurance. Go pay it, right? You have to stop. You have to put the brakes on. So that's adult children and blended families. I'm curious what you think about that. Do you have a situation such as that? Reply to the comments. I'd like to see it. Or are you aware of others who have done this and you can see the devastation? I'd like to hear that story. You reply to the comments and let me hear that. Love to hear that. Thank you for joining us. I want to encourage you, if you would, like, subscribe, share, but thank you for joining our podcast. This is Jim Cunningham with Faith Influencer.